Okay, welcome back. We are in the middle of Basi Legani Tashin Chavav. In the booklet, we're up to page Yotes, which is Sif Dalid. Once again, this is a Bilti Muga Maimer. It's an unedited Maimer by the Rebbe, so the Sifim are not divided by the Rebbe, but in the booklet it's Sif Dalid. And we're at a great place in the Maimer where the Rebbe will now start presenting. I don't want to say the main point, but definitely the point that will bring it all back down. Meaning, for the past 2 weeks, in the beginning of the Maimer, we've been flying very high. Last week's shir, Siv Beis and Gimel, was all about how we can't understand what's going on here, and not only we can't understand, but it's inherently and essentially ununderstandable. So that's not a great place to be in terms of connecting with logic, in terms of connecting out of appreciating what's going on. So we're actually at a pivot point in the Maimer where we're going to start seeing the idea of how this is all relevant and how this is all practical. As someone asked last week in the shir, if it's all ununderstandable, so then why are we learning about it? Or as we emphasize the question, what's the point of it at all? Not only why are we learning about it, what's the point of it? If it's so abstract, if it's so ethereal. So let's see. But to summarize what we've been speaking about in the past 2 weeks, let's do it from the Friedrich Parak itself. So turn back in the booklet to page Ches. In these booklets, they printed the Friedrich Parak in the beginning of the booklet. So as we know, the cycle of Basi Legani follows the 20 prakim of the Friedrich Rebbe's Hemshech of Basi Legani from Tavshin Yod from 1950. And this year's Parak is Parak Tes Zayin. So the Rebbe in our Maimer is quoting piece by piece Parak Tes Zayin and then explaining it. So it's not our first time talking about the Friedrich Rebbe's Parak Tes Zayin. But let's see the first part of the parak in the Friedrich Rebbe's own words, for the sake of a summary, for the sake of seeing where we're up to, and then continuing with the Rebbe's point. So here we go, page Ches. Parak Tes Zayin of the Friedrich Rebbe. V'hinei beis inyonim elu da'orin seif l'mayla mayla adin keitzel mata mata adin tachlis. These two ideas that the Zohar calls Oyer in Soif being above to no end and below to no finish. These are two levels within Orin Soif. And as the Rebbe explained in the beginning of our Maimer, the tremendous chiddush, what's going on here, is that the Friedrich Rebbe is now uncovering that the Zohar does not mean to say that Orin Soif extends to two opposite extremes of pre-existing worlds, or worlds after they exist. Rather, the big chiddush here, the Rebbe uncovered, is that Zohar is telling us that Orin Soif itself is two levels. And not just is two levels, v'yesh hefresh gadol b'neihem. There's a tremendous difference between these two levels. So Orin Soif being above to no end, a definition of Orin Soif that it is inherently above, meaning it's Or HaNelam V'Asosum, it's the hidden and secret light, She'enoi Begeder Gilui V'Amshacha. Not that isn't revealed, that's not able to be revealed. That categorically cannot be revealed. It will never come into a revealed state. Uchemaimer, as the Tikkunei Zohar says, Antu ilah kol ilah insisima al kol sisimin, that it says in Pasuk Aliyah that this is the level that's called ilah kol ilah insisima al kol sisimin, above all those that are above, secret from all those that are secret. And as we saw last week in Parak Gimel, the Rebbe took us through a Maimer of the Mittler Rebbe, where the Mittler Rebbe offers two interpretations exactly how to define that level. But for the point is that either way, whichever way in the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer you're going to take, it's telling us that this is a level that's inherently secret. That's inherently secret. Okay, so that is really where we're up to in terms of the Rebbe's Maimer. In other words, that we have defined. That what is the level that we want to talk about? We're talking about a level that is inherently secret, that it's inherently never going to come to a state of revelation. Now, the opposite extreme as well. Umasha Orin Soif lemata mata adin tachlis. Continuing in the Friedrich Rebbe's parak, this that Orin Soif is below to no finish. Hu begeder gilui kol panim. That is what will come to a state of revelation. V'hu hashayich el ha'olamos. That is what is relatable to the worlds. Appreciate that we're not saying this is what comes to the worlds because we're still in a state of Ein Sof itself, as the Rebbe explained the Chiddush of this parak. We're not talking about the way that Ein Sof actually extends into the world. We're talking about the way Ein Sof is itself. But there is a part of Ein Sof, there is a level within Ein Sof which will later be made relatable to the worlds, which means that as we are still in the state where it's only Hashem himself and his Or, no worlds yet, pre-tzimtzum, pre-everything, but already for Hashem himself, he is revealing himself. Hashem is revealing himself for himself. Within Hashem's atzmus itself, as if we could say, Hashem is revealing himself to himself. But that's lamata mata din tachlis. So now contrast that back to what we are talking about. Back to what we're talking about, the level of maila maila din kates is as if to say that even for Hashem himself he's hidden. That Hashem is hidden for himself. So we're talking about Or. This is where it gets really complex, really abstract. We're talking about Or Ein Sof. But it's a level of Or. What's the definition of Or Ein Sof l'mayla mayla indicates a level of Or that even for Hashem himself is secret, is hidden. What in the world does that mean? How does yeah, exactly. It's not right. So not just mind-blowing like, oh, I can't define it and draw a picture of it, but like the words are inherently oxymoronic. You're saying that it's Or, that it's a revelation, but it's secret even for himself. Exactly. That's the big topic of this parak. That's the big topic of this year's Maamar. What are we talking about? What does that look like? What does that even mean? Now, this is really where we're up to in terms of the Rebbe taking us through the parak. So for now, let's go back to Tafshin Chavav, and the Rebbe himself will obviously quote the next few lines of the Friedrich Rebbe. But that's a great summary using the Friedrich Rebbe's words itself as we explained them in the previous prakim. So back to page Yotes in the booklet, Sif Dalit. Now that we defined exactly what we want to talk about this level of Or Ein Sof, L'mayla Mayla din kates, this level of revelation that's not revealed even for him himself. The Friedrich Rebbe continues to explain these two levels of Masha Or Ein Sof L'mayla Mayla din kates, U'Lemata Mata din Tachlis. Yes, we're going to explain both. We're going to explain both the L'mayla Mayla din kates and the Mata Mata din Tachlis. But again, the focus is on the L'mayla din kates. Hein beis bechinas makif. These are two levels of what's called makif, of what's called transcendent. And that is now going to become the massive topic of the whole parak for today, the whole shir for today, B'ez Hashem. We're going to talk about makif. Makif dar yashar or makif dar choizer. There are two levels within makif. Again, the word makif itself means transcendent, but it's not a better translation than the word itself. So it's a concept that needs to be explained, and that's what we're going to be doing this year. So we'll just say makif. So you have makif. There's two types of makif. Makif of Or Yashar, which means the makif of the direct light, or makif dar choizer, and the makif of the rebounding light, of the returning light. What does that mean? We'll explain. The makif dar Yashar hu makif akarav. The makif called Or Yashar, the makif of the direct light, that's a level of makif which is close. V'hu begeder gilui al kol panim, which means that even though it's makif, which means that it's transcendent, which means that it's not directly there, it's not directly relatable, but it's slightly relatable. That's what we're trying to bring out by saying makif hakorev. Makif hakorev is opposite. Makif means literally makif means it's far, it's surrounding, it's not there. But korev means it's close. So yes, the level of makif hakorev is a level that's somehow makif, and yet is still at least in the realm of revelation. We'll explain. Umakif dar choizer hu makif harachok. And the makif that's called Or choizer, the makif of the returning light, that's the makif that's far, which means that not only it's not there, it's not even able to be there. It's not even relative to revelation. Okay, so those are the words. This is like a lot of Kabbalistic glossary that we're just merging together. And we're saying, okay, so these are all the terms that we want to explain. So you have Gilui, you have something that's actually there, that's actually revealed, and that's what we're going to call, that's Or Pnimi, that's the internal light. Then there's Makif HaKarov, there's something that's transcendent, that's surrounding, it's not there itself, but it's close, and that is connected to the Makif of Or Yashar, the direct light of the Makif of the direct light, and that it's not revealed, but it's related to revealed. It's relatable to revealed. And then there's makif harachik, there's the far makif, which is what we call makif darachayzer. It's the makif of the returning light, and that's not even relatable to be revealed. So back to the oisius that we're talking about. Forget pnimi for a second. Forget the lowest of the three. Forget the pnimi. If we want to just talk about makif, the way we talked about it last year from Pasuk Yod, there's simu dechol simin, what's hidden from what's hidden, and like we explained, because there's some things that are hidden, but they're just hidden from us, and then there's things that are inherently hidden. So now we see the parallel to that. Makif hakarov, the close makif, is what we would call sistimin. It's things that are hidden, meaning it's hidden right now, but it's begeder gilui. It's able to be revealed. So that's called makif hakarov. It's the close makif. But sisimu dechol simin, what we're calling l'mayla maylad and kates. What's the ultimate hidden, inherently hidden? So now in parallel oisius in Kabbalah and Chassidus, that's makif harachik. That's the far level of makif. So far, we didn't explain anything. I just matched up a bunch of different words to each other. Okay, so this is like, on the worksheet, you matched it up and you'd have no clue what's going on. Great. So you passed the test and you're back to where you started and before. Okay, so now we have to start explaining. Now, for disclaimer, the Friedrich Rebbe does throw in the makif of yosher and the makif of chayzer, like that terminology, but in our Maamar that's not going to be explained. We're not going to go into the isis of makif of yosher, makif of chayzer, which is its own sug in Chassidus, and the Friedrich Rebbe did say it, but the main discussion will be makif hakarov versus makif harachik. So even though there's a lot of words here, let's stick with those words. That's what we want to understand here. What's makif of karov? What's makif hakarov? What's makif harachik? And those words are just more words to bring out what we're trying to understand here. This paradox of something that is makif. It's oyer, but it's not only hidden, it's inherently hidden. So that's just other words for it, makif harachik. So in order to explain that, we have to obviously back up. And what is makif at all? So let's first start with the actual words of the Friedrich Rebbe. The Friedrich Rebbe sets out to explain this by using a mashal of a Rav and a Talmid, which is a go-to mashal in Chassidus, which sometimes that mashal is even more abstract than the nimshal. Here we go. The Friedrich Rebbe explains this with the mashal of a teacher that is giving over logic and intellect. He's teaching something to his student, because that's what a teacher is supposed to be doing. He's supposed to be teaching something to his student. That means that the student is meant to understand what's going on. But right away, we have a problem. The ultimate problem that Chassidus discusses by way of a mashal, that the Rav inherently cannot explain to the student. Why? Because he's way greater than the student. It's not just that he's a little bit smarter. It's not just that he's a lot smarter. He's not in the same realm. He's not in the same league of the student. That's always the mashal of a teacher and a student that Chassidus gives. I haven't seen this in Chassidus, so I'm about to say, so disclaimer, but perhaps that's why we call it a Rav and a Talmid throughout Chassidus. We don't call it a mashpia and a Talmid, or a moire and a Talmid, or a melamed and a Talmid, which would be maybe more proper diktuk. We call it a Rav and a Talmid. Now, Rav is always used for a teacher, right? Rebbe, that means a teacher. But the word itself actually means the great one. Rav means great. So what's fascinating is that we're trying to describe a teacher and a student. Inherently, there should be a connection there, but he is a Rav. He is a great one. And maybe that's why we always use that lingo. Because in the mashal that Chassidus always gives, a real Rav is not someone who's just a little bit smarter than the student and therefore able to explain something that the student doesn't actually get. A real Rav is someone who's supposed to be in an entirely different league. He's great. In other words, he's on a different level. The archetypical Rav that maybe we don't know of in our day-to-day versions of teachers and students. The mashal we always give is like the Rebbe and maybe Rabbi Yoel has the Talmud, right? That's always like the mashal of Chassidus, because this mashal itself is not very relatable. Because usually when we have a teacher and a student, the teacher is just a little bit smarter than the student. And he's able to explain something the student doesn't actually understand. But that's not what Chassidus talks about when it talks about a Rav and Talmud. And again, I think we can appreciate the diuk Rav. He's a Rav. He's a great one. He's inherently a great one. And he's trying to bring something over. He's trying to explain something over to the student. So that's what Chassidus always gribbles. Chassidus always goes down into the process of how that works. And by the way, throughout Chassidus, this is always the go-to mashal for basically the concept of tzimtzum. For basically the concept of oyer ein soif, of the infinite light of Hashem coming down and being mashpia and giving off energy to this world. Inherently, you're talking about this infinite gap, this infinite chasm, and jump between Or and Soif and finite, infinite light and finite worlds. And that's the mashal of Rav and Talmud. So what's the process of how that works? That would be a mashal for Tzimtzum. So what's the process? So there's three steps. So again, the premise is that we have to appreciate that the logic, the thinking power that the Rav possesses is something that not only the student doesn't actually get. The student will never be able to, will not understand at all, cannot understand at all. And that's what's going on here. The teacher is diluting his thinking in a way that the student will be able and should be able to receive the knowledge. So as he's giving over the knowledge to the student, so now we could divide into three parts. So there is the part of the knowledge that is penetrating the student's brain and is actually being absorbed in the student's brain in a fully developed way, in the ultimate way. Hainu, meaning the student grasps the knowledge in a way that the knowledge is now one with the student. Parentheses, Geshmaka reference to Tanya Parakeh, where the Alter Rebbe at length defines the process of what happens when a person learns something. Over there, the Alter Rebbe is obviously talking about Torah, but he's actually describing the process of learning, the process of information entering a brain, and the Alter Rebbe has these beautiful expressions, how the brain actually becomes part of the knowledge, and the knowledge becomes part of the brain. Scientifically, we know this, that the gray matter of the brain actually expands when there's more knowledge, that's the more data that's in the brain. The brain matter actually expands. The tissue or whatever it is actually becomes bigger. So the Alter Rebbe and Tanya, because when a person learns something, the Alter Rebbe is talking about Torah, but when a person learns something, that knowledge actually becomes one with the person. It becomes part of the person. So that's the first level of what's going on with the Talmud, and that's what we would all think is the main point of what should be going on with the Rav and the Talmud. He's actually teaching him something, which means that the Talmud actually gets it. However, at the end of the day, this is a Rav, this is a greater one, a greater person. That takes us to step 2, that there's part of what the teacher is teaching that will remain aloof, will remain Mekif, and not enter and not penetrate the student's brain. In other words, the student won't get everything that the Rav is teaching. But in this itself, in Mekif itself, we're going to divide it. So what we're starting off now with is Mekif HaKarov, the close Mekif. Hainu, that this information that is Mekif, that the student doesn't get, but he's able to get it. It hovers over, so to speak, like he feels that there's something that he's not getting, but he feels that there's something that he's not getting. And as the Rebbe always quotes this Gemara, as the Friedrich Rebbe quotes this Gemara in this context, that the Gemara says that it'll take 40 years for a person to truly connect to what his teacher really meant. It'll take 40 years for a student to really understand. We're not just talking about to understand, to really get das, to really become one with what his teacher had in mind. Now, there's many discussions about this. What does that mean? Does it mean literally 40 years? Is it 40 levels? Can the 40 years be expedited? There's a lot of talk about this. Specifically, we should just point out that when it came Tavshin Nun, the 40th year of the Rebbe's Nesius, the 40th year from the Friedrich Rebbe's Estalkos, the Rebbe talked a lot about this Gemara, about this concept, specifically Yud Shvat Tavshin Nun, and then throughout that year, because that was 40 years. So it's explained in a lot of places. Again, specifically in Tavshin Nun, we're not going to go all the way into it, but let's understand what that means. What's happening during those 40 years? Let's understand what it means. Does that mean that 40 years later, the student will review what he learned 40 years earlier, and then he'll fully understand it? No. It doesn't mean that he has to hear the information again. It doesn't even mean that he has to think consciously about the information again. Because him. Rather, what it means is, he learned something 40 years ago. Now he fully grasps the depth of what was discussed 40 years earlier, that until now he didn't fully comprehend. Does that mean he didn't understand anything for 40 years? Of course not. Then what makes him a Talmud? What makes him a Talmud if he didn't get anything? No, there was the level of Pnimis. There was the knowledge that he did comprehend, that he did connect to. But then in addition to that, there was the depth that was hovering over him, that he was like, he was able to feel that there's something going on here that he's not getting, and all of a sudden it clicks. How do you move on? But reverse engineer that. From the fact that 40 years later it will click, that shows us for what's important for us now. That means that throughout the 40 years, from the beginning of the 40-year journey, it was already something that was relative to him. It's just that it was relative to him in an aloof and transcendent way. Okay, so that is Pnimi and Maki Talmid. However, so that didn't really bring out the Ravness of the Rav. Again, Rav means not just smarter, but inherently great, which means inherently above the capabilities of the student. So that didn't really bring this out. That only brought out that it's going to take time. Not that the Rav is inherently greater, but if we're talking about a Rav that's inherently greater, that means that Nishardim Eitzel Harav and Yonim Ke'elu, that means that there remains knowledge by the teacher. That means that there's going to be information that is there, that exists in the relationship of the Rav and Talmud. And this is what's going to be very hard to put this is what the whole member is going to be putting our finger on exactly what we're talking about right here in this next line. But that means that there's going to be information that's there in the relationship between the Rav and the Talmud, but it's hidden not only from the Talmud now, not only from the Talmud in 40 years, that means that it's always going to be hidden. This is what we're talking about. This is the mashal for Maki Talmid, the far transcendent. So it's a mashal to understand Pnimi, Maki Talmid, Maki Talmid. There's the knowledge that is given over to the student, that the student comprehends and connects to on a tangible level that he could grasp and fully explain. There's the level that of seichel that the Rav could connect to. That the Talmud could connect to only after 40 years, but that shows that there was a connection there, albeit in an aloof way, throughout the 40 years. That's Maki Talmid. And then there's information that's so hidden that it's not even going to come out even after 40 years. That's Maki Talmid. So, very good. So now we have a mashal. Do we understand it? Not really. Because what does that mean? That there's seichel, that the Rav meaning a great one, but meaning a teacher. So what is the seichel that is hidden, that is inherently hidden? And what's the point of it? What is it? What's the point of it? So, okay, we have a framework of a mashal, and again, this is all the Friedrich Rebbe's perek, and if you look back, it was a pretty long perek this year, and the Friedrich Rebbe's mayrich to bring out this point of the hidden seichel of the Rav. So we have the framework of the mashal, but obviously we still have to understand it. The Hainu, right here, this is the chiddush of the Rebbe in this Maamar. This next line. In fact, repeating from Rabbi Yossi Paltiel, he claims that, really, there should be a new perek starting here, V'hainu. Right now, this is where the Rebbe is going to pivot this whole discussion. Because we're bringing up Sai last year and Sai so far at the beginning of this year, we're just bringing out more and more and more how there's this hidden. Zok the Rebbe, so what are we talking about? And like the question keeps on coming up. So why are we talking about this? What's the point of it? Zok the Rebbe, the mashal gave us, the mashal enlightened us that yes, it's the ultimate makif, it's makif harchok, and it's hidden from the teacher, etc., but it exists within the framework of a teacher and a student. That means that it exists in the context of revelation. It exists in the context of something being there, something being given over. Or back to our original Isis, it exists in the context of, or at the end of the day, it's some sort of light. So that gives us the opening to that we need to figure this out. We can't just let this remain completely abstract. It's an abstract, that's the ultimate abstract, but it's somehow so there, and so relevant and important and applicable. What's going on? V'hainu, 2 lines from the bottom of page test. V'hainu she'ein hakavana linyonim she'ein lehem shayches latalmud klal. That tells us that they were not talking about something that's totally inaccessible to the student. She'oz ef shaleimar she'ein b'chinas makif ala talmud. Beautiful idea of the Rebbe here. If we're talking about what you might come out from learning the Friedrich's Perek, thinking that the Friedrich is just describing this level that's hidden and secret even from the teacher himself. A cursory glance, a cursory read of the Friedrich Rebbe's Isis would suggest that the highest level of Maki is something that the teacher himself doesn't even understand. And exactly. Exactly. Like we discussed in Oren Soif, it's like the Kivayachol, it's hidden from Hashem himself. Zakt the Rebbe, but we're calling it Seichel. We're calling it Or Makif. So if we're calling it Or Makif, let's open up this sugi of Chassidus, of Kabbalah, of Or Makif. If it was totally inaccessible, you wouldn't call it Makif al HaTalmid. Afilu Makif HaRachik. Page Chaf, you wouldn't even call it Makif HaRachik. If you're calling it Makif, I'll explain in a second. If you're calling it Makif, that means that there is a connection to the student. This is the definition of the connection. This is the definition of the revelation of the Or. It's Or, Makif HaRachik. Ala Talmud. So what does that mean? So you see the next line. That was basically a summary of the Friedrich Rebbe's point of the Maamar with the Rebbe's foot in the door of what the point here is. And now the Rebbe will start explaining it, and you see the next words, V'yuvan ini mekaf harachik, behektim, etc. So we're going to open up now, we're going to blow open the sugya of Makif. Makif HaKarv, Makif HaRachik, but before that, Makif in general. So before we go into the Rebbe's words to explain it, let's just appreciate one important premise. The idea of Makif comes from Zohar. Zohar talks about, in the words of Zohar, it's usually Mimali Kolmin and Soiviv Kolmin, which are very familiar terms in Chassidus. Mimali Kolmin literally translates as it fills the world, fills all the worlds, and Soiviv Kolmin literally translates as it surrounds and it transcends all the worlds. Very importantly, Tanya Perek Mem Ches, the Alter Rebbe, and it's a constant reference back to Tanya Perek Mem Ches, the Alter Rebbe puts in a very important point. If you're first of all, Soivev cannot mean surround, because surround is a concept of space, and Soivev is above time and space, because it's the abstract level of Hashem's energy that's above, whatever that means. Above is also spatial, but it's above this world. It has nothing to do with this world. It cannot be explained in terms of this world. So this world is made up of time and space. So Soivev, the Alter Rebbe explains, cannot mean that it literally surrounds, like you would think of this big ring of Ur that's surrounding the world, this ring of Ur. It can't be that. So what does it mean? So Alter Rebbe gives us a better word to explain Soivev, which is Makif. So now Mimali Kolmin and Soivev Kolmin from Zohar, which are all over Chassidus, could be understood as Pniimi and Ur Makif. The light that is internal and the light that is, again, Makif, aloof, abstract, ethereal, surrounding, etc., whatever exact word you want to use in English. Now, what does that mean? So there's many, many different mishalim used to explain this, and some of which we're going to see right now in the Maamar. But the point of all the discussions is very important. That the premise is that if we're even though Makif sounds like it's above and beyond, you're discussing its aboveness and beyondness relative to this world. That means that by definition, it's connected to this world. If we're just describing, let's say, the essence of Hashem, Hashem's essence isn't definitive relative to this world. We all could appreciate that. We have no clue what the essence of Hashem is, but we could all appreciate at least that it's not definitive by definition of this world. You wouldn't say that the definition of Hashem is that he's greater than this world. No, because he existed before there was a world to measure his greatness by. So it's not untrue to say that Hashem is greater than the world, but that's not the definition. But if the whole definition of Ur HaSoivev is Soivev Kol Omen, it surrounds all the worlds, or Makif, that it's transcendent and it's aloof and it's abstract to the worlds, that means that there is a connection to the world. The point of Makif is not that it's not here. Makif is very much here. Makif is very powerful. And the point of Makif is that its definition is in not being present in a palpable, tangible way. Again, many mishalim for this, some of which we'll see in a moment. But that's the opening premise. Whenever you talk about Pniimiyya Makif, Soivev and Mimali, you have to appreciate that the starting point is that there's something here that we're talking about. And as we're going to see, not just something here, but something extremely powerful. Makif is extremely powerful, Soivev is extremely powerful, not beyond us. Yes, beyond us because it's called Soivev. Yes, beyond us in a way that's called Makif. But not that it's not present. Not that it's not applicable. Okay, so now let's understand that. Page chaf. So to understand what is makif harachok, and again, that's really the punchline of this maamar. That even though it's rachok, you're still calling it makif, and therefore, by definition, makif means that there is a connection. We'll understand this by prefacing So as we know, moving along in the chain of the Rabbeim throughout Basi Legani, and every Basi Legani the Rebbe quoted all the Rabbeim. So we quoted Alter Rebbe in the middle Rebbe, and now we're up to Tzemach Tzedek. So in Derech Mitzvah, and what's fascinating is, you see in the footnote Dalid, so it gives you the page number. But what's fascinating is that which Maimer in Derech Mitzvah is it? It's Mitzvah's Binyan HaMikdash. Binyan HaMikdash. This is the whole Maimer of the base of Mikdash. Basi Legani is all about V'shachanti b'soicham b'soichal echad ve'echad, as the Rebbe repeats pretty much in every Basi Legani, starting from the Friedrich Rebbe's Maimer. The summary of the entire point of Basi Legani in one line is that the avoid of a yid is to build a base of Mikdash Hashem in this world. So it's fascinating that the big discussion here, Makif and Kara, and of Makif, is from a Maimer in the Derech Mitzvah, which happens to be a Maimer about the base of Mikdash. We're soon going to quote the Maimer of the Alter Rebbe, which is also a Maimer about the Mishkan. So there is definitely this powerful connection here. Okay. So the Tzemach Tzedek over there explains Bebir Klolus in the Makif. And over there in that Maimer, it's one of the central Maamorim where the Tzemach Tzedek explains about Makif. And we don't have it in front of us, but I'm going to quote periodically. I'm going to quote a few lines from that Maimer. I have it in my booklet on the side. So, for example, right here in the beginning of the Maimer, the Tzemach Tzedek says one of these very important points. He says, if the whole point of that we always talk about is pnimi, right? Pnimi is something we can relate to and something tangible. So what's the point of makif? So that's what we said before. The premise of this conversation is makif is very important. By the fact that there is a discussion about makif, that there's a lot of discussion about makif, and again that that it's called makif, which means that it's surrounding something. It's soivev kol olmin. That shows us right away that there is a point, that there is a connection. So Zakt Tzemach Tzedek that makif absolutely has an effect, and a very strong effect. Shagam hu peil peulasoi. Makif also has an effect. Shadugma lazeh, and the starting example of this that the Tzemach Tzedek brings, Royim ba'adam lamata, we see in a person down here. As we know that there's always a connection between us down here and Elikus, because as it says in Eoiv, that from my flesh I could see Elikus. In other words, we're given to understand things the way they exist Lamaila by way that they exist Lamata. And this is a very important Yesoid in Chassidus, that there is this inherent connection between the way we exist and the way Elikus exists, and therefore we could understand somehow, in some way, the way things exist by Elikus, by understanding the way they exist by us. So what is the makif that exists by us? Koyach HaRatzon, the power of will, the power of wanting something, of desire. Dehine, what does that mean? So the Alter Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek explains, Dehine, yeshnei chayes oivarim, shehu chayes pnimi, shemislabish b'chol eiver ve'eiver lefin yonoi. There's a starting discussion of the different energy that exists in the different limbs, which is the personal, the personal energy that is of every individual limb. Every limb has its function, and in order to function for its purpose, it has its package of energy. For example, the power, the energy of vision that goes into the eye, the power and the energy of walking that goes into the foot. As we understand that the eye itself does not see. You could have chas shalom, a person who has an eye but cannot see, blind, right? And same thing, a person who has a leg but chas shalom, he cannot walk. So clearly, it's not just the bones and the skin and the tissues and whatever, and the tissue and the nerves of the foot itself that make the person able to walk. There's a koyach. There's an energy that's coming from the soul itself, from the life force of the person itself, that then goes into the foot, that enables the foot to walk. And chas shalom, if a person is not able to walk, it means that central energy is lacking. And the same thing with any individual power of any individual limb. You can't compare the energy that goes into the brain, that goes from the brain into the hand, to the energy that goes into the foot or to the heart, chulu, etc. The famous joke of the prank of Does your nose smell? Do your feet run? Right? And you might be built upside down. So like so the Tzemach Tzedek has that lashon in the Maamar. Tzemach Tzedek says he says lo yichteiv haregel lo yahalich hayod. The hand is not going to walk. Lo yichteiv haregel. The foot is not going to write. Ela haregel yahalich v'hayod tichteiv. The foot is going to walk. The hand is going to write. So there's a specific energy that needs to go into the foot to enable the foot to walk. It's not just the fact that the person's alive. The fact that the person is alive should therefore mean that every part of the body should function equally, but they don't. Every individual organ has its own individual function. That means that there's an individual energy that's supplying the power to do that specific function in that specific organ. So that is that's koyach pnimi. That's an internal. What does it mean internal? The go-to way to always explain pnimi means tailor-made, cater-made, individualized. That's always the best word to explain pnimi or pnimi. And here we have that mashal in the body. The individualized energy that enables the individual organ to function in the individual for the individual purpose, individual function, that's our pnimi. However, in that Maamar, Tzemach Tzedek goes even further. He says that even within brains themselves, different brains think differently. That means that the koyach of thinking is different, even person to person. Different people could walk different amounts of speed, different speeds, right? So all that shows that even not just within a person, the different organs function individually, but even that same power functions individually, person to person, right? So this all brings out the individuality. That's koyach pnimi. That's our pnimi. However, then there is the concept of a Rtzon, the concept of desire. And this Chassidus unpacks, and we're going to have a big discussion about this, Be'ez Hashem. The Chassidus unpacks that when a person wants to do something, that's a lot deeper. What do I mean deeper? A lot more aloof, a lot more abstract than just the ability to do something, the ability to do anything, any specific function. The wanting to do something is a lot deeper. The chiddush is, we could even be talking about a specific desire to think, a desire to walk, a desire to see. Which means that it's a desire connected to a specific organ, and as we explained, a specific energy of that specific organ. Even though the desire is coming into effect in a very specific, individualized way, and by the way, right there, focus on that line, that's important. That shows us what we're talking about this whole time, that Mקיף has a connection to Pnimius. Right? Mקיף has a connection to Pnimius. The desire to go will result in you walking, which is a specific Pnimiustic koyach. The desire to look will result in you seeing or looking. Right? And same thing with that. So right away, that's an important line. That shows that what we're talking about here, that there is absolutely a connection, and not just a connection, a strong connection, and not just an effect, an integral effect of something that's Mקיף. But it's still Mקיף. Why is it Mקיף? Nevertheless, it doesn't happen in a way that the power, that the desire connects to the specific organ, connects to the specific energy. And this is now we're gonna micro-examine this. This is a beautiful discussion we're gonna have now. How do we know? What does that mean? What does that mean? That Rtzon, that desire, even though it's a desire for something specific, but it's not connected, it's not coming from that specific place. Because if so, this is the main proof. We're going to develop this, but this is the main proof right here. Remember this line. Because if the desire was coming from that individual organ, then then desire would be multiple different desires. Let's use the number 2. Then there will be multiple desires. Which means, let's use the number 248, right? The Ramachi Varim. There's 248 limbs. So let's say there are 248 functions that a human being could function. If Rtzon, if desire, was coming from that specific function, there would be 248 different desires. There would be the desire to walk, the desire to see, the desire to write, etc. 248 of them. So now I probably would challenge and say, okay, who says there's not, right? Okay, we'll develop this, but let's develop the premise. Let's put down the premise, and then we'll develop it. The fact that there's not 248 different desires, that shows that that Rtzon is not a koyach pnimi, right? The eye will not walk, and the hand will not, the foot will not write, as the Tzemach Tzedek said before. So the koyach pnimi is pnimi. It's individualized. It's set for that organ, and that's it. But Rtzon is not that. There's not 248 different Ritzonos, there's one Rtzon. Shaharatzin lahaskil. If it was ischalkos, shaharatzin lahaskil lo yeh doime leharatzin lirois lahalich. If it was divided, if it was individualized, then the desire to think would not be the same as the desire to see or to go. And what do we know? And we'll develop how we know. Yet we know, yet we see that the mihus, the definition of desire is the same by everything. Shehu inyan netiyas hanefesh. This is that the soul wants something. When the Rebbe said in the original audio, you hear the Rebbe say "Valazoi viler," because this is what the person wants. Valazoi viler. Let's just put in one idea of Chassidus about Ratzon. Chassidus explains many places that Ratzon oisius tzinor. The word Ratzon, which means desire, is the same letters as the word tzinor, which means a channel, a pipe. Which and the way Chassidus explains what that brings out is that Ratzon is not a certain function. It's actually the expression of the person himself. Ratzon is the closest you're going to get to etzem and nefesh, to the essence of the person himself. Now, disclaimer, not for now. There's Ratzon, tainug, and that's its own discussion. What's deeper? Which one is the pneumius of which? It's a whole discussion in Samach Vav. We're not getting into Ratzon versus tainug. Ratzon, as opposed to a specific energy, a specific function to do a specific act, Ratzon is the person himself. The person wants. We've discussed this many times in the other Mamarim. That's why it's very hard to fight a Ratzon. It's very hard to argue with someone who wants something. Because argument means logic. Argument, and even feeling, I could try to manipulate your feelings, which are midas. But Ratzon is way deeper than that. Ratzon comes much before that, so to speak. Ratzon, you're talking to me myself. You can't change me myself, so how are you going to change what I want? Now, it's possible to control the Ratzon, sure, and that's a big part of Avodas, to control our Ratzon, sure, but Ratzon is very deep, and the way to control it is a lot different than just changing Seichel or changing Midas. So that we have had that discussion in many Mamarim. I'm not going to focus on that specifically now, the power of the power of Ratzon, but the definition of Ratzon is that it's the person himself. In our context, what that will mean is that if it's the person himself, then it's not 248 different Ratzonos. It's one Ratzon that affects all 248 different functions. Let's finish the paragraph and then we'll develop it more based on the Mamarim of the Tzemach Tzedek. But this is the point of what we're trying to bring out here. Mקיף, but Mקיף has a connection to Pnimi. In other words, Pnimi is the limb. Pnimi is the specific limb and the specific function of the limb. Mקיף is the general desire that a person has to do many things, including maybe this specific thing. There's absolutely a connection. There's a connection between the way a person wants to write and the fact that he's writing. So that's the power of Mקיף, and remember, this is the premise that Tzemach Tzedek is trying to prove in the main point of the Maamar, that don't think that Mקיף is not powerful. Don't think that Mקיף is so abstract and ethereal and there's nothing to discuss here. There's a lot to discuss about Mקיף. Mקיף is the engine, is the energy, is the power that person by which the person functions, not individually, not in individual functions, but the very essence of his power to function. Yes, the actual action, the actual function will happen by the specific energy that is invested in that specific organ. But what's going to wake up? What's going to get the power of the foot to walk? What's going to get the specific power of the eye to see? That's through the power of desire. The power of desire is extremely strong. It's extremely present, even though the organ itself will not feel that direct power. It won't feel the direct Ratzon. Rather, it's only the Mקיף took away. So that's our mashal for Mקיף, Ratzon. So let's work backwards now, because there's a lot in the original Maamar Tzemach Tzedek that we could unpack over here to really develop this. It's a very geschmack sugya. There's a Maamar about the Mishkan. It's a Maamar Parshas Nosai. Parshas Nosai is where they're building the Mishkan and they're giving out the different jobs in the Mishkan. So there's an interesting connection there. And there's a Maamar in Likutei Torah and then a Maamar in Oira Torah from the Tzemach Tzedek where it explains that. I just want to put in 2 cents that. When you hear in the audio when the Rebbe introduces this point, the Rebbe says that Tzemach Tzedek explains in Derech Mitzvah in Sefer Mitzvahs, which is Derech Mitzvah, and in the Agois to Likutei Torah. Now, in the old prints, where they put in those words, which you hear in the audio, and there's no footnotes, because I guess they couldn't find an exact mimer of the Goyis and L'Kutei Torah where the Tzemach discusses this. Now, to be fair, the next paragraph, which we'll do best from next year, we continue into another mashal about Maki Akarav and Maki Harchok, and that is from a mimer of L'Kutei Torah with the Tzemach Tzedek notes on it. That's a different mimer in Parashat Bracha. But it is a little interesting. The Rebbe did say that this is an explanation from the Tzemach Tzedek's Agos and L'Kutei Torah, and I know we're nitpicking here, but that's what the whole Basi Legani is. The whole Basi Legani is the Rebbe nitpicking in the Friedrich Rebbe's words. I think we're allowed to do that in the Rebbe's words. So perhaps I'm saying this totally b'derech efshar, but perhaps maybe the Rebbe is referencing the following discussion that we're about to have, which is from a mimer of the Tzemach Tzedek on this mimer of the L'Kutei Torah, Parshas Nosei, which the Rebbe doesn't reference here, but this is a core place of Chassidus where it discusses this. So over here, the Alter Rebbe in the L'Kutei Torah says as follows. He says that very geschmack of art. He says, let's say it outside. The fact that a limb is able to do something against its nature. The person will put his foot into fire. That's against the nature of the foot. The foot shouldn't want to go into fire. It's going to be burnt. It's going to be destroyed. So what causes the foot to go into fire? The answer is Rtzon. But if the Rtzon was coming from the foot itself, why would the foot have a self-sabotaging Rtzon? A self-hijacking Rtzon? An animal doesn't do that. An animal doesn't do something that will hurt itself. Why would the foot do something that will hurt itself? The answer is that Rtzon is not coming from the foot. It's coming from the person.
Why is it not considered the same self-sabotage as the person putting the...
Because the person could have a desire that reaches beyond the specific function of the person as a person. It could be of the nature of the person. Right. No, even the nature of the person as a physical foot, hand, eye, etc. In other words, physical life. The person could have an ideology, but a foot doesn't have ideology. So clearly the Rtzon is not coming from the foot.
Ideology is Rtzon.
Correct, that's what I'm saying. But you can't say that a foot has ideology. A foot is not about ideology, a foot is about walking. By the way, just we could put in very geschmack, this is a vart and avoida. The Tzemach Tzedek actually, Tzemach Tzedek puts in a note over here in the Maamer that in avoida, that's the vart of b'chol meidecha, the vart of being able to go against your nature. That is the vart of Rtzon. The idea to be able to go against your nature, we're giving a specific zoomed in mashal of the foot being able to go against the nature of the foot, but that is the power of being able to go against your nature. That is the power of Rtzon. That comes from Rtzon. That's why Mesiras Nefesh is Maki, etc. In all the Maamrim about Mesiras Nefesh. That's not the exact topic over here, but let's remember. So what are we talking about here? That shows that the Rtzon is not coming from the foot itself. The Rtzon is not coming from the specific organ, because then there would never be a Rtzon to go against the function of that specific organ. In Oyat Torah, in his notes on that Maamer, and again, Ulay of Shleimar, maybe this is what the Rebbe meant when he said, you hear in the audio that in the Nagois to L'Kutei Torah. In Oyat Torah, the Tzemach Tzedek develops this one step further. It says a very geschmack of art. He says that, how do you know that the Rtzon, it doesn't affect the aver in a pneumistic way? He says because when the pneumistic koyach affects the aver, in other words, when the hand writes, you actually see a change in the hand. Right? The muscles of the hand become cramped. The foot walks, the muscles of the foot actually change. The brain thinks, this we can't see maybe with our physical eyes, but the muscles of the brain, whatever, the tissue of the brain actually contract and expand, right? And you can see this in scans nowadays, that the brain is actually, the aver, gashmi, of the body is physically changing. But that's only when it's using its koyach pnimi. Why? Because that specific energy, that individualized energy is bisyashvos. That's the vart, is bisyashvos. It's settled, it's absorbed in the aver, so the aver will physically change, but when it uses its specific function. Zak Tzemach Tzedek, does the aver change when it has a Rtzon? No. The brain wants, the foot wants to walk. Does the foot now change? Does the foot start revving up? No. The hand wants to write. The person wants to write. Does the hand start to no. So that shows that it's not a koyach coming from the hand itself. A koyach pnimi will change the hand itself. A koyach pnimi will change the foot itself, but the Rtzon will not. That shows that the Rtzon is not bisyashvos, that the Rtzon is not coming from the aver itself. It's a makif, the koyach of the person as a whole, of the person in general. So all that are the specific discussions, the specific ISIS. But again, to bring out the point, let's summarize and finish up at this point that Racon is Mekif. That's what we got. That Racon is Mekif. So now we have a mashal for Pnimi versus Mekif. And in the person's body, in the person's function, there's a specific function of every individual organ, of every individual aver, and then there's the koyach of Racon, there's the power of desire, which is Mekif, which is above and beyond the person as specific functions, and it's more connected to the person itself. Is it powerful? Yes. Is it felt in a pneumistic way, in an internal way, by the person himself? No. And as we saw, the specific proofs that the Tzemach Tzedek brought. This is just explained to us Mekif. And now we have to see, so what's the difference of Mekif HaKarov and Mekif HaRachok? Because really Mekif HaRachok is a discussion here that will continue with Hashem next year.